little bitty muscles in the back here that you don't have to worry about. One that's sort of interesting is there's a little bitty muscle that lies right under the gastrocnemius up here, known as plantaris, and it runs down between gastrocnemius and soleus into the Achilles tendon as well. It doesn't really do very much, but apparently people occasionally rip it in athletic adventures, and it hurts a lot. Deep to these muscles, there are a bunch of little muscles. There are muscles that obviously flex the toes, and one that flexes the big toe, and then some that just go into the lower side of the foot. And then, as I said, when you get into the foot, the big difference between the hand and the foot is that in the hand, you remember you had a superficial digital flexor up here, and deep to that you had a flexor digitorum profundus, a deep digital flexor. So you had two flexor muscles in the forearm. In the foot, on both the top and the bottom, the short flexors are actually in the short digital flexors are actually in the foot itself. They're not back here in the calf. The long digital flexors do come out of the calf. But all these muscles down here are branches of the tibial nerve, and when they get into the foot, they change their name and become the plantar nerves, a medial and lateral plantar. And much of the muscles of the foot are similar in name and more or less function to those of the hand, except that obviously the big toe is not as mobile as the thumb, and it's in line with the others. Okay, so let's just go back. I've tried to sort of draw a connection between uppers and lowers. So when Dr. Fernandez talked about the nerves and the muscle groups of the brachial plexus, you had these, right, the ventral rami of C5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8T1, founding trunks, forming cords, then the cords give names. If you read more about the innervations beyond the names, you'll find that people, even though these are all ventral rami, okay, don't forget, it's all ventral rami, limbs are all ventral rami, but you can divide them into ventral divisions and dorsal divisions. So basically, if you look at these nerves, the ones that are in gray here, musculocutaneous, the median, the ulnar, they are innervating things on the front side of your arm. Okay, and most of the stuff on the front side of your arm is a flexor this or flexor that. The stuff that's shown in back, which in this case is mostly the radial nerve, they're on the back side of your arm. And they're basically mostly all extensors. Okay, so there's sort of a ventral part of the brachial plexus that's doing the inside. So if you sort of line up here in what we call anatomical position, you got one set of nerves that are doing this, and they're mainly, flexing this, flexing this, flexing this, flexing this all the way up, and another set that are coming on the back, and they're just extending this, extending this, extending this, and extending that. So if you look at the distribution of muscles that are innervated by these ventral part of the brachial plexus and dorsal side of the brachial plexus, or anterior, posterior, depending upon the book, all the ventral stuff, musculocutaneous, median, and ulnar, is on the front side of the arm, front side of the forearm, and the palm. And the dorsal stuff, which is mainly innervating extensors, is on the back and the back. Okay, really cool, makes good sense. You can divide up the lumbosacral plexus also into what we could call ventral parts and dorsal parts. So this stuff, the obturator, is gray, sort of like the ventral stuff of the arm. The tibial is sort of like the ventral stuff of the arm. The femoral is sort of like the dorsal stuff of the arm. And these various gluteal things are like part of the arm. The problem is, when you try to look at this at a person, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So if this is dorsal, this femoral nerve, it's mostly innervating this stuff. Pretty weird. tibial is supposed to be ventral. It's doing hamstrings back here. And it gets sort of screwy. What's going on here? Well, what's going on here? So this is what is comparable to dorsal stuff. This is femoral nerve is sort of comparable to triceps. And these are sort of comparable to the extensors on the lateral bits of radial nerve going down the back. And I've told you these are sort of comparable to the stuff on the ventral side. But obviously, if I'm standing here, that's not the case. However, were I a fish, it would look like that. So if you look at the muscles that's going into the fins of a fish, for example, the comparable puff, the radial nerve and the common fibular nerve are going to dorsal structures of the fish's fin, and the parts of the tibial nerve is all going into ventral parts of the fish's fin. And then if you happen to have a pet lizard or salamander, and it dies and you dissect it because you're really curious, you'd find that again, the dorsal stuff would in fact be on the dorsal side. It would get lots of sunshine, and be on the outside of the body. And the ventral stuff would be on the inside of the body and going to the sole of the foot and so forth like that. People have changed the rules, okay? But it's pretty easy to see because in the arm it's fairly straightforward. This is ventral, this is dorsal, we call this ventral, we call this dorsal. Well, this quadriceps is sort of like my triceps, and indeed the bones bend the same way, but it's on the front side of my body. These digital flexors and things down here are sort of like the things that flex my wrist and my fingers, but they're on the back side of my body. Something's happened to our lower leg, and if you think about it a bit, the most obvious thing, and I'm not wearing my flip-flops today, but I think you're well aware, that if I stand right here, my thumb's on the outside and my big toe's on the inside. We have rotated our lower leg so that the outside, we've taken our lower leg so it's sitting on the ground like that, right? So that this is my big toe and this is the back of my arm. That's what we've done with our lower leg. We flipped it around, so instead of having a thumb on the outside, we have a big toe on the inside. It may seem sort of odd, but the fact is there are lots of ways of looking at this. But for example, if you if you sit down in a situation like this, which in fact, if you look at fetuses, that's how they're sitting. Your thumb's going up, your big toes going up, your elbows here, your knees here. Things move in about the same direction. And our dorsal muscles, our triceps, are comparable to these quadriceps out here. These forelimb flexors are comparable to these calf flexors here. And in things line up pretty much. And if you sort of look at the shapes of the bones and sizes of the bones, it makes a lot more sense. So if you start looking at this at ventral and dorsal, you have to remember that human ventral and dorsal have rotated a bit. But get your big toes and your thumbs lined up, and it all makes a lot of sense. Okay, that is basically all I wanted to tell you. There will be a few questions from this on the final exam. What I have done in the lab so far, as I said, is I dissected the back of the thigh and the back of the calf of the cadaver that was sitting over in the corner. I didn't want to turn one of your bodies over. So any time in the next month and a half before the final exam, or month or 3 weeks or whatever, I have a pro-section of the gluteal region where you can see that big sciatic nerve coming out, and you can see the gemelli, and you can see piriformis and gluteus medius and gluteus maximus and all these hamstrings. And then I've also dissected out the calf region so you can see gastrocnemius and soleus and the superficial vessels and nerves. Okay, as of last count, until I hear further, there will be a review session on Wednesday that presumably may or may not have a lab quiz attached. I guess we could do it both days, actually, if that would.
Well, like, what are the pinning, like, because you guys will be doing the pinnings Friday, right? So how, like, do you think there's like maybe our tests if you guys aren't pinning?
You know, as I said a long time ago, human anatomy hadn't changed much in a couple of million years. The structures that were important on last year's exam and the structures that were important in allied health exam and the structures that are important in medical are pretty much the same structures that you'll have. Or if you want, we can give them a list of structures to pin. It's pretty straightforward. In fact, I think they have all the old exams, so they know the list of stuff. But hey, just because they got pinned in the past doesn't mean we can't pin stuff that's in your dissector or we've talked about. Okay, so there will be. Let me know if there's any drastic change of plans. And like I say, you know, I don't want, if more than 5 people don't want it, I don't want to disenfranchise. This is a small enough class as it is. Okay, so we'll be in the lab if anyone wants to show up. I'll show you what I prosected. If you don't want to show up, that's fine too. We'll be there on Wednesday, and somebody or other will be there on Friday. And this is an exam on Halloween. Don't forget. Any questions?
Does anyone have money for the Halloween party?
Yes. Now, the questions we asked.
Yeah, there's no new material from last Wednesday. You're
The hamstrings are innervated by flanks. Quadriceps are innervated by flanks. I'm not going to pin me. Okay. Sure.